you have to be willing to engage in, this abstract thinking, um, you know, these hypothetical worlds, like what would it be like if, and, ultimately, I don't know if you guys have thought about this or not. And it's worth thinking about. I mean, obviously we're a scientific and a technical discipline, but economics, originally was an outshoot of like everything, physics even, right? Of inquiries into philosophy in the beginning. Maybe mathematics was a little bit earlier than that, but I'm talking about the modern form of um, academia. So, um, and then, closely connected is political philosophy, and then eventually economics becomes its own discipline. But even today, we have sections in different departments called political economy, and so there's this overarching question, which is, and we talked about this a little bit, I think probably the first day of class. Um, every society has to answer three questions, right? What to make, how to make it, and who's going to get it. And it's really that last one where the politics, really comes up to the surface when you talk about, who's going to get what. And so, to try to think about these things um, in a way where you can measure, what's the impact of different outcomes from distributing things different ways, then you have to kind of ask yourself, these big picture questions. Like, if I was going to organize society, and obviously, this is a big task. In fact, I don't think, I mean, the reason why people who were philosophers at the time took on this stuff is because they were willing to make it their life's work. So we get the benefit by reading about, what some serious people thought, and we don't have to do all that work ourselves. But what they were thinking about is like, hey, if I was the one to organize society, this is how I would do it. And I don't know if you guys have thought about that or not. But when you do, then at least if you go down the trail that modern economics has gone, then you realize that they're really this separation of concerns, right? I mean, the who's going to get it is all about um, distributing the good and distributing it to different people under different circumstances. And that's all information that is available from the demand curve. And so that's the reason why we define social benefit, and it ends up being, right, and I'll put a triple equal sign, right, the area under the demand curve. And our thought experiment was, well, okay, we have a certain number of goods and we can give them away. Um, what's the best way to give stuff away? And basically the way that economists have come down on that question, and I don't know if you guys agree. So I'll take a volunteer for this. Who'd like to chat with me this morning for a minute, if you haven't already? Um, Daniel, are you there? Daniel Goddard? No, Daniel. Uh, it says there's a new message. Oh, okay, Marlena, you want to chat?
Yes, hi.
Hi. Okay. So, so Let me go ahead and move this over. So I'm going to draw the demand curve again, just so we have a point of reference here. So, or a demand curve. And so I don't know if you remember last time, but the way that our demand curve is organized, so you can see my demand curve, right?
Yes. Yes, I can see it.
Yeah. So so the first units of the good, because we start out here at 0, right? And then there's unit 1, unit 2. It goes to these consumers here. And I'm talking about a market demand curve, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Um, so goes to these consumers here and not to these people down here.
Okay.
And and the difference between them is the people that get it first, at least in our economic model, it's the people with the highest willingness to pay, right? Um, so I mean, I don't know. Do you have any comments about that? What do you think about that? Is it
Um.
unfair?
Um.
How would you decide who gets it first?
I mean, I guess willingness to pay. I mean,
Well, let's be
does
concrete. Let's be concrete. Let's talk about a good. How about, I don't know, do you have a favorite car? Um, so I've noticed, have you noticed the newest Jeep Gladiator?
yeah, I think I've seen it.
I think it's a pretty nice looking vehicle.
Yeah.
Anybody else see the new Jeep Gladiator? Anybody? Anybody like the Jeep Gladiator? You can put it in the chat if you do. Jeep Gladiator, anybody? Nobody likes the Jeep Gladiator. What about the Tesla Model 6? How do you feel about that one, Marlena?
Um. I mean, yeah. I mean, I've seen it.
You're not really
I'm
excited
not
about
like
them?
I'm not super well. I'm not super into cars like in general. I just kind of take what I can afford as long as it gets me from point A to point B.
Yeah, but don't you ever see one and you're like, but that, like when I get my big job after I graduate, like I'm gonna get myself one of those. No?
Uh,
You never think about
I
that?
mean, I don't know. I haven't really. I mean, I guess I haven't really thought that far ahead to it. Kind of focused on
Ah, yeah, you got
affordability.
you got to think about the big prize at the end,
Yeah.
that's motivating you.
I mean,
So, yeah.
yeah.
What? So anyway, so you haven't picked out a favorite car yet.
No, I don't think I have.
Okay. So, that makes a little bit difficult to have the conversation, but maybe you can follow along then anyway. I
Yeah.
don't know. Is there something else that um, there's something else that piques your interest that you're like, I'd like to have this, but I don't. I don't know. Maybe like even if you get, do you ever go down to the beach? I go down to
Yeah.
Newport quite often, and I go onto the beach and turn around and I look at the houses there, and I'm like, that's nice.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I do that also. Yeah.
You know, but who gets those houses, right? It's
Yeah. The
the
people
people.
that yeah, the people that have like the higher willingness to pay for them, but also the people that have the ability to pay for them.
Yeah, it's because willingness entails in economics ability, right?
Yeah.
So a
Okay.
lot of times people are careful in economics to say, oh, it's willingness and ability to pay. But in most of the economics literature, we just say willingness to pay, and we're like, of course, your willingness to pay depends on your income. People that have higher wealth, higher income, they have a higher willingness to pay. And so I don't know if you ever think about it, you're like, you know, that I'll tell you, I'm not really susceptible to envy. I always think to myself, well, the person who has that nice house in Newport, they probably either worked really hard for it, maybe they own a business, or maybe they're a doctor or neurosurgeon. They did something, really important, and they got lots of money and they're gonna spend it on a house. And I'm cool with that. I don't have jealousy issues that way in general. But there's one house that really I'm just like,
Yeah. Yeah.
and I feel jealous about it. And you know what it is? So I go down to this place in Newport. It's called Little Corona. I don't know if you guys know where that is. Anybody know where Little Corona is? It's if you take PCH after you get off at MacArthur down there past Fashion Island, and you hit PCH, and you take a left just before you get to Crystal Cove, a state beach. There's a street called Poppy, and you go right on Poppy, and then it's the last street before the streets end, and you can park over there and you can walk down. But anyway, so I'm down there, Little Corona. I turn around, and I look behind me, and there's this gorgeous house up on the bluff, and it's got 3 tiers coming down, and I'm okay with everything, and I don't think anything's unfair. But the first tier, the people have a basketball court. That's nice.
Yeah.
And then the second tier, they have a tennis court.
Oh man.
That's nice. The third tier is the one that bothers me. And you know what's on the third tier? Can you guess?
Pool.
Yes, a swimming pool. And I'm just like, really? Come on. You got the beach right here, and what do you need a swimming pool, right there, like practically on the beach, when you could just go out to the beach and have a swim. But that's when that feeling of injustice like kind of rises up in me. Gosh, they got a pool on the beach. Come on.
Yeah.
But obviously those people are very wealthy, and they're the ones that are able to afford that property, and they're also probably the people that are buying the Tesla Model 6. And even though, like, I would like that stuff, I'm down here, which means that I didn't put the equilibrium price, but the equilibrium price is somewhere here, and I'm not getting served. so
Yeah.
I go without. That's the way that willingness to pay works. Whoever's willing to pay the most is the one that gets the good. And probably when we're talking about um, gorgeous homes and in great locations, and we're talking about luxury cars, um, like, for most of it, it's okay. But what if we talk about something like healthcare? What do you think about that, um, Marlena? Is it okay that you know people that want to go see the best doctors and get the best service and are willing to pay for it, they're the ones that get it, and people down here don't?
Um. I. I. I don't. I don't know. I feel like when it comes to like bigger things like healthcare and stuff, it gets like more difficult. Like there's like a lot of like morals and other stuff involved besides just like the economics.
Well, yeah, well, yeah, and listen, I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm just going to say that, you know, and I will. I'm playing with you and everybody in the class a little bit, because economics actually does have some common sense answers to some of those. Let's just call them morally challenging questions. But um, you know, at first blush, meaning when we first consider what the theory tells us, it's important for us to understand what the theory is saying is, these people with a higher willingness to pay, they're the ones that are going to get the Tesla Model 6, or I don't know. So Ryan chimed in. So I'm going to ask Ryan, what's your car, your dream car. Do you have one, Ryan?
Uh, Not necessarily. I just thought a Tesla Model 3. It's pretty sick.
Oh, you like
Wouldn't
it
mind
better
one.
than the Model 6?
I don't think they have a Model 6.
Or a Model S, I should say.
Oh, yeah. I
Yeah.
like the Model 3 a little more than the Model
Uh,
S. I think it looks a
really?
little nicer.
I think the S looks so much nicer than the 3. Um, but the 3 is much more affordable.
Yeah.
So anyway, and actually the reason why I didn't bring up the Model 3 is because actually the Model 3s are pretty affordable. I don't
I mean,
know.
comparatively, right?
Yeah, I mean like
Like once
like
you
the
deck them out, they're like around 40.
yeah, but that's like compared to like a Mercedes or some other like nice car, that's a very reasonable price. I mean, you could drop, you know, 70 grand on a Mercedes in a minute.
That's true.
So like a $40,000, car these days is like the Jeep Gladiator that I was talking about is like I think averages between 35 and 50, but if you put like anything on it, it's going to be 50. So it's like as much as a Model 3. But I guess the point that I was trying to make, um, and that reason why I want to talk about luxury cars is that, yeah, the people that are willing to pay the most are the ones that are going to get them, and the other people aren't. But here, and I'll follow up with you, Marlena. Okay, can you think about like also from a social perspective why that makes sense? That the people who are willing to pay the most get the nice cars, but the people that aren't willing to pay the most don't.
From a social perspective.
Yeah, and it has a little bit, I'll give you a little bit of a hint. It has a little bit to do with the thing that I said last time about transactions costs being assumed to be zero.
Um,
And if it's not ringing a bell, I'll give you a hypothetical and see if you can make the connection. Okay,
okay.
so
Okay.
suppose you're somebody who can't normally afford a really nice car. We'll up it. We'll say it's a brand new Maserati or a brand new Ferrari or something like that, right?
Okay.
And you go out to um, one of the casinos out here, and I don't know if you guys know any of the casinos like Pachanga. They have them advertised and things like that.
Yeah.
The one that I think has a very ironic name is the one that they call Morongo
Yeah.
because you know why I think the name's ironic?
No. No. I don't.
Because most of the time people gamble, they lose money,
Yeah.
right? Now, Morongo, if you break it down, what's it say?
Moron. Go.
Yeah, like if you're really dumb, come on to our casino and lose your money. So I think it's a very ironic name. But suppose you're going to go out to one of these casinos and you enter a drawing, and because a lot of times they just have drawings. If you walk in the door, you have a chance to win a Ferrari or something like that. And you can't normally afford a Ferrari, but you win a Ferrari. What do you think you're gonna do with your Ferrari? You're gonna get it and drive it home?
Um. God, I don't even. I don't know. I don't
Well,
even know what.
what would you do if you won a brand new Ferrari, which is probably about a $200,000 car? What would you do with it?
Uh,
Would you drive it around?
I mean, I think. Yeah. I mean, I think I would. Yeah. I mean, maybe I'd drive it around a little, but it's a day. I don't know. Maybe also. Oh wait, would it be like selling it to someone that would buy pay more
Yeah,
for it?
yeah.
Like someone.
Honestly, if I want a brand new Ferrari or Maserati, it wouldn't take me long to figure out that I'd be better off selling it because, the other thing too is you may not know this, but for yeah, the insurance, it's like $1,000 or $1,500 a month just to insure one of those cars to drive.
Yeah.
So yeah, most people would choose to sell it, and then who would they sell it to?
The,
Somebody
yeah, someone with a higher willingness to
just to
pay.
pay, yeah, somebody up here. So it's easy for us to think about that when we're talking about tradable goods. And even if you won a brand new, like $2.5 million house down in Newport, there are a lot of people would be like, well, I'd like to live down here, but I could sell this and I could buy myself a home someplace, you know, a little further away from the beach and put $1 million in the bank and I'd be better off. So so yeah, and guess what? The key is that those types of trades, like when you decide to sell the Ferrari, nobody has a gun to your head, right? Nobody's
Yeah.
forcing you to do it. It's all voluntary. And and so over and over again you'll hear the term like free trade and and I would encourage you not to use that term because it's too easily confused with free to do anything you want. It's not clear and specific, but in economics the basic point that we make is that voluntary trade, if the trade is voluntary, if Marlena voluntarily chooses to sell her Ferrari to Bob, then they're both going to be better off. Marlene is going to get the money she'd rather have, and then obviously Bob is getting the car that he wants, that he's willing to pay for, or he wouldn't have bought the car. So as long as it's voluntary, then economists conclude that both people are going to benefit from that trade. And and that's what's embedded in all of our assumptions about who gets the good. So if you ever get into one of these discussions with somebody, dinner table conversation, or anybody else, and they're like, well, the economy, blah, 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 you just say, hey, listen, um, voluntary trade is mutually beneficial. It benefits both parties. Like, what's the problem with having voluntary trade? And I don't know if there's anybody here, I mean, obviously, most of you guys are econ majors. Um, they have a couple people from a couple other disciplines. But if there's anybody who seriously thinks that less voluntary trade, not having voluntary trade, would be a good thing. Um, but I will point out that there are a couple of things that are problematic when we start to talk about goods that are not easily tradable, and medical care is one of those. If you were, I don't know if you are a mother, Marlena, but if you were
No, I'm not.
and you had a sick child
Okay.
and you got the equivalent of a lottery ticket, you got the ability to take your sick child to one of the best treatment facilities for some serious illness in the country, so your child to have a much better chance of getting better. you know you'd probably feel differently about trading that ticket to somebody else who was willing to pay more for it, so your child couldn't get the treatment,
Yeah.
or had to get treatment at some place that was not as good. And one of the other places it comes up is when we're talking about um, organ transplantation. So you probably know there actually is a pretty active market in a black market in organ um, um, donation, but they get paid for it
Yeah,
in
I've heard
in
about that.
in other places in the world. And you could make the argument, hey, listen, I really want the kidney and I'm willing to pay for it. And there's somebody usually in some other, lesser developed country, they got two and they feel like their life would be better off giving one up. What's wrong with that? It's a trade. It's voluntary. But somehow I think that most people feel like, maybe there's something not quite right about that. Anyway, for the most part, I'm not saying that, again, in the case of organ transplantation and maybe healthcare, there aren't good reasons. And again, I think that economists, as you go further along, they've studied these issues quite a lot and talked about the moral and other dimensions that people might be concerned with. But in general, yeah, voluntary trade makes sense, and it's embedded in our assumptions about measuring social benefit. And ultimately, like we said last time, what we're going to do is we're going to take the area, we're going to add up the willingness to pay for each of the units that's distributed, assuming that those units find their way to the people that are willing to pay the most, either through secondary transactions or immediately in the market. And that's going to be our measure of social benefit from distributing the good. So, okay, and I wanna say one other thing, just to emphasize it, is we can also call the demand curve the marginal benefit curve. Now, we're gonna play with that a little bit later, and we're gonna be more specific about it. But one of the things I wanted to tell you guys is I think one of the most confusing terms in economics is the word marginal. And it actually has a proper mathematical definition, and outside of that mathematical definition, um, the idea gets kind of fuzzy depending upon the application, meaning that it's not really well and clearly defined. But marginal, you can almost always, and I'll use this symbol for mean, it's approximately, but when you guys are first learning it, it is, think of the word additional instead. Or if you're comfortable with the word incremental, that's okay too. They're not exactly the same, but they're close enough that you can almost always use them interchangeably. So that's going to tell us that, so marginal benefit is about the same as additional benefit. So to kind of hammer it home, so what we're saying is we use willingness to pay as the measure of the additional benefit to society of having a unit of that good available. So for example, suppose we were to say, okay, we have exactly this many units available. We're going to stop right there. And let's say that's 100 units, okay? And let me drag it over. So we have exactly 100 units available. What would be the additional benefit to society of having one more unit, the 101st unit? Well, we would just say, okay, there's somebody here that's going to get the 101st unit, and then there's their willingness to pay. And we would just add that. That would be the additional benefit we would get from that extra unit being distributed. And again, ultimately, this is all going to come down to a measure of benefits and costs, right? When we're talking about, how many units are we going to produce and when should we stop? Well, if the costs to society end up being higher than the benefit, if the costs of producing the good is higher than the willingness to pay of the person who's going to get it, then that's when we decide to stop. Okay. So are there any questions about that? Questions? Okay. So.
Hi. Oh, I had a question.
Yeah. Who's
So the
talking?
marginal benefit, oh, Kapil,
Okay, Kapil. Go ahead.
the marginal benefit is the area under the curve from the point where you currently are to the point where you're adding units. So
Yeah,
essentially the
yeah,
benefit of it. Okay.
yeah, yeah. It's the additional benefit. So like yeah, we were saying like we already have. I'm gonna try to make this an area. We already have this area, and um, and I should. I'll give you guys a first level um, formal definition, and I'll tell you guys what the true definition. So marginal benefit, its technical definition is um, and I'll use D for change in, and then you guys will get this in a minute. The change in total benefit divided by the change in output. So Kapil, does that make sense? It was Kapil, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Yeah. And so what you also kind of notice is that this is the derivative of the total benefit curve. And that's the formal definition of marginal benefit. The marginal benefit is a derivative of the total benefit curve. So since over here, this area that we just talked about is the current total benefit, right? We said the total benefit is the area underneath the demand curve, right? The change in the area is going to be whatever additional area we add as we increase our quantity, because we're measuring quantity down here. Here.
That makes sense. Thanks for
Okay, sure. So now let's talk a little bit about the supply curve. Okay. And so we're going to do something analogous for the supply curve. And our supply curve is in general increasing. It depends again on the specifics, and we'll talk about it a little bit more later on. But this is going to also, our supply is also going to be our marginal cost curve. Okay. And it's kind of a little bit hard to think about this, but you separate your concerns. When we're talking about demand, we said, well, you know, there's this group in society that are consuming the good, and we're going to represent them on the demand curve. And then there's this other group that's distinct that's supplying the good, and we're going to represent them on the supply curve. And it's pretty obvious when producers are producing goods and services, they incur costs. And ultimately, and I think I mentioned this before, we want to measure their opportunity cost, which is really the value of the next best alternative that they gave up with those resources, right? If I have a company and maybe it's a restaurant, and I'm making hamburgers and French fries, that's the main thing I have on my menu. Well, obviously I could change my menu and I could start making, tacos instead. And so maybe my next best alternative use for those resources is to put them into some other productive use. But it gets difficult to measure opportunity cost precisely. So most of the time, what we do is we end up adding up the input costs. We say, oh, okay, you know, we spent this much on labor, we spent this much on electricity, we spent this much on raw materials, and we have receipts for all those things. But I should remind you guys that opportunity cost is the true measure that we always are using in economics. And we just abbreviate that to cost because, again, it's our discipline and we use our jargon. So as long as you guys are trained in economics and I'm trained in economics, then we can talk about cost and know that we mean opportunity cost. But the opportunity cost always has two components to it. It has what we would call an explicit component, so an explicit cost, plus implicit costs. Okay. And I'll write the definitions here. So explicit costs are sometimes called accounting costs, because if you ever wonder about the difference between economists and accountants, they're interested in costs that generate a cash flow. Really, accounting is about tracking cash flows. And so sometimes economists and accountants collaborate with one another, but fundamentally, their view on things is different because economists want to find out, what's going to generate an action within when we're talking about a business, like a business context. What's the reason why businesses produce more, produce less, and that might have something to do with their costs, but there may be other factors in there too. Just like we're interested in the case of consumers, what's going to make the consumer purchase this good versus that good? What's going to cause an action? And the accountants are just interested in tracking the cash flows. So there's a different objective. So another way of saying an explicit cost is any cost that would be associated with a receipt. So if you have a labor bill, you're going to have a receipt, right? You're going to be able to track that with a receipt. If you purchase raw materials, you'll be able to track that with a receipt. And I'm trying to get it to let me drag this a little bit so we have a little bit more room. Okay, but an implicit cost has no receipt because it does not cause a direct cash flow. So what are examples of implicit costs? Well, the two that are given in most economics textbooks, and I don't want you guys to think these are the only ones, it's just that obviously if it doesn't generate a cash flow, it's something that's a little bit mysterious, right? So we have to think about it. And this is one of the reasons why economists are especially prized as management consultants, because good management consultants that are economists are very good at identifying implicit costs that a business incurs that don't generate a cash flow. And normally they have to do with a management practice that can be altered to reduce that cost. So the classic one that's brought up in almost all economics textbooks is the opportunity cost of the owner's time. And do you guys understand why that would be an implicit cost? Anybody want to try to take that on? Maybe Arsenio, you there? Arsenio? No.
Yes.
Oh, you're there. Oh, you kind of roboted out on me a minute. Can you? Are you connected well enough? Or Arsenio the robot. How about, let's see. Tanish, are you there? Ramasetti? Okay. How about Carrie's song? You there, Carrie? Okay. Okay. How about Justin?
Yeah,
Okay, how you doing?
pretty good.
So does that make sense to you, like why the opportunity cost of the owners, or why the owner's time of a business owner's time would be an opportunity cost that doesn't generate a cash flow?
Yeah,
Okay.
because you can be doing something else, right?
Well, yeah. So yeah. So for example, suppose you're a skilled plumber and you own a plumbing business. You could run your own plumbing business, but you could also get a job as a plumber, and you're giving up that income, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it doesn't generate a cash flow. But why doesn't it generate a cash flow? That part is probably a little bit less clear.
It doesn't generate cash flow because it hasn't happened, so you don't know like how much you're gonna make if you're doing that other job.
Yeah, and the other part of it is that what does the owner get paid from his own business? He gets paid whatever the business makes above its costs. What we would call the profit goes to the owner, right? That's what he gets paid. So I'll just give you a really quick example. Hopefully this makes sense. If a skilled plumber could make $100,000 working for a plumbing company, he's owning his own, he runs his own business, and that business generates $50,000 worth of profit that he gets to take home each year. Then can you see how his actual implicit profit is a minus 50,000, because he's keeping 50,000, but he could be earning 100,000. So he's actually losing $50,000 a year by running his own company from an economic perspective. And I'll give one other example that's common is idle equipment. So idle equipment means that they're not using the equipment. Okay. And so this is really common in the context of big construction companies. I don't know if you've ever seen it or not, but a lot of times if you're driving along the freeway and you look out, you'll see like there are a bunch of backhoes and bulldozers, and they're just parked.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you've noticed something else, but suppose you own one of those big pieces of equipment, and they're sitting there just parked. They're completely paid off, so there's no cash flow. You're not paying monthly payment for them or whatever. But are they still generating a cost for your business, an opportunity cost?
Yeah,
And can you explain how?
because they could have been at another construction site and then be working, maybe.
Yeah, so there's an active market in equipment rental. And so what happens a lot of times, if you see those lots that have the big equipment on them, and you notice there's a little sign and it'll say ABC equipment rental. And so what happens is the big construction companies that own those things, when they're not using them, a lot of times they'll take them to an equipment rental place and let that place rent them out, so they do generate income for the company. And so if the equipment's not being used and it's not being rented, then there's actually a cost, which is the foregone rental income, the income they could be earning if they rented that equipment out. And that'll never show up on their books. It's just a cost of choosing to let the equipment be idle rather than renting it out. So since we're talking about this, I'll just say one other thing really quickly, because it'll be important later, and that economic profit is equal to the revenue minus the full opportunity cost. Okay, and I just put full in there to emphasize we're talking about implicit plus explicit costs. So, like I said, in the case of the plumber, you have to count the salary he's not earning because he's running the business as a cost to the business. And it's always the case, because you add in these additional opportunity costs, the economic profit is always going to be less than the accounting profit, because accounting profit is only the revenue minus the explicit. And I want to see if I can drag this a little bit more to fit it all in here. Explicit costs. Okay. Thank you very much, Justin. Do you have any questions, or is everything clear?
Yeah, everything's pretty clear.
Okay. All right. So the supply curve is the marginal cost. It measures the additional cost of supplying additional units, the full opportunity costs of those additional units. And it also, a lot of times, will say that it's equal to the marginal social cost. And we'll differentiate between these things a little bit more clearly later on, but I want to be, you know, I want to emphasize something right now, and that is that when we think about society as a whole and the impacts on society's economy, everybody in society either incurs costs or benefits associated with these resource allocation decisions. And so businesses are just as important as consumers in calculating the costs and benefits. So it's true that here we're talking about, businesses doing the supplying, but ultimately those businesses are owned by members of society. And so those are real costs from a social perspective. It's not as though there's some disembodied, zombie mega corporation, and if mega corporation produces an extra unit of widget X or widget Y, that it just magically appears and nobody has to pay for it. It's a cost, right, to society, because the owners of Widget Corp are people, and those people are going to have less than they would have had otherwise if they didn't incur that cost. One other thing that I want to tell you guys is this is just by way of introducing language. I'll ask a question, and whoever wants to kind because this sometimes causes confusion, especially these days. So what I should have said, what is a widget? Anybody want to take that one on? What's a widget? Okay. What about you, David? Oh, was somebody else gonna chime in? Joseph?
Yeah, I was gonna take it if that.
Yeah,
okay.
that's fine. Fine, Joseph. Go ahead. We haven't
Isn't
heard.
it a catch-all term used in the industry just to like X and math is just a whatever product that whatever company makes?
Right, exactly. It's a thingamajig. It's a whatchamacallit. It's a doohickey. It's a something that's a nothing. It's just, you know, yeah, it's just a widget. Exactly. Um, and Joseph, since we're talking, what do you think? I've asked that question, and what do you think is another really common response I get?
Fidget spinners.
Oh, no. That's not. I haven't heard that one yet, but that's probably a good one. Think a little bit more. So where else do we use widget these days? A little app on your phone.
Oh yeah.
So I've had a lot of students say to me, "Oh yeah, it's like a little app on your phone." I'm like, "Oh no," because that's not at all the way it's been used for like the last, I don't know, like 75 years or something like that. Like widget's always been like it's a something that's a nothing. We don't want to be specific. We'll just call it a widget, which could be like a little tool or a bale of hay or whatever. It's just something. But yeah, so if I use the word widget here, I do not mean a little thing on your phone. I mean, yeah, some product or service or something, and I just don't want to be specific. It's just, could be pizza, could be iPhones. It's just widgets. So thank you very much, Joseph, for your accurate answer. Okay, so this is I think where I'll cut it off for today, and we'll pick up talking about supply and marginal cost and marginal social cost next time, because the stuff we're going to talk about next is more stuff. So I'll go ahead and